Up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of Summoners Team's live pod, and I've got a probably very quick video for you about champion mastery trends. This is mostly about measuring differences over time, but we'll have some kind of snapshots as well for what's going on. I made a video sort of like this a while back where I talked about the fact that I think it's wise, at least for a starting point, to look at highly skilled players when you are initially comparing power levels of champions and then kind of diverging from there. And so I wanted to kind of take a second to showcase why that matters and why champions just can't be directly compared. So let's talk about that, okay? So let's talk about champion mastery trends. We've got 5 case studies here. We've got the Swain rework, or I don't want to call it rework entirely, but there's a big update to Swain 2 patches ago, and then we buffed him again last patch, the patch that, went out 2 weeks ago. Galio got really popular because he was a very, very big deal at Worlds. There was a very obvious spike at his pick rate when the World Finals happened, but even before then it was already increasing really heavily in pick rate. And then just as sort of more control variable type things, I looked at the recent small nerf to Aatrox, the recent mid-size buff to Fizz, and the recent mid-size buff to Katarina, all from patch 14.22. So flashbang warning here, it's going to be a much brighter screen than what you're seeing already. 3, 2, 1. I'm griefing. There we go. Okay, so there's a lot to look at here. Let's take a sec to break down everything here, okay? So this is the primary data table. Not everything you see on the screen is based on this data table, but this is the primary data table. This is champion mastery level of a player playing Swain during one of these patches. So in patch 14.18, 25% of Swain Mid players were champion masteries 1 through 4. 21% were champion mastery 5 through 8, 16% were 9 through 13, 11% were 14 through 21, and 27% of Swain Mid players were mastery level 22 or higher. I will say that this is on the higher end. In general, is on the higher end, but a distribution like this is not terribly uncommon. Swain is not the most mained mid laner by ratio. He's also definitely not the least mained mid laner by ratio. In general, this is Swain's mastery pool, and what I wanted to talk about is the changes in that over time. As you can see, of course, the relative share of high mastery Swain players went down when the update came in and the follow-up buffs came in. And indeed, a larger share of Swain players were low mastery Swain players. But even still, we have a solid 15% were very high mastery, which is completely respectable. Even in this, I would probably argue, overbuffed version of Swain. I think he's a little bit too good right now. Still, 15% of his players are very high mastery, which is not really on the low end. So a different way of measuring this is comparing 14.21 to 14.18 because, of course, 22 has not been completed yet. So, total game counts are a bit fraudulent. But we can see that there is a 50% increase in high mastery Swain games or Swain main games. Patch per patch, comparing 14.21 to 14.18. There is almost a double of very skilled Swain players, mastery 14 to 21. There's 2.5x for Swains who are quite experienced. A 4x, or so pick rate for people who are relatively new to Swain. Now keep in mind, this is still up to mastery level 8, which is no slouch by any means. But yes, indeed, that during the rework patch, there was a larger flood of low mastery Swain players than high mastery Swain players. And I actually went and checked our mastery data comparing 14.22 to 14.18 or 19. And indeed, actually, I know in the last video I said, hey, his win rate is down, but I don't think there's going to be a huge influx of novices. I stand by that still being relatively true, but the fact that there's still 50% of Swain players are very hardcore Swain mains, and you'll see very different examples here in other champions here to explain why I kind of had that statement there. Now, it's worth noting that indeed, though Swain is currently down win rate compared to 14.19 or 20, the Mastery 22 or so cohort of Swain is the same win rate from before and after. So the win rate difference can, in fact, be, among many other variables possibly, explained by an influx of low mastery Swain players larger than the influx of high mastery Swain players. Okay, this change in distribution. This is what this chart is, by the way, right? Is more and more of the share of Swain games is lower mastery, which by itself will of course lower the win rate of a champion. Every single champion in the game is sub 50% win rate in the mastery 1 through 4 bucket. This bucket is sub 50, and of course this bucket's 50 5% or something. And obviously, as this grows, it goes down towards sub 50 and away from 55 plus, right? Of course. I forget it's actually 55, but it's high. This, by the way, for most champions at balanced is around 52. Just hey, by the way. Okay. So we also have a partial accounting of 14.22. This was taken either on Monday or Friday. I think it was on Friday, actually. I took an account of, okay, even though we're still missing like several days worth of games from anything else, actually, yeah, compared to 0.18, 14.20 already had 188% as many games from very, very high mastery Swain players, and of course, even more than that from complete Swain novices. So this is to say, really ultimately, that by delivering a Swain update and it being pretty powerful, at least something that people were willing to try, a bunch of people who had not played much Swain went to go try Swain, and a bunch of people who, either were Swain mains and churned, came to go play more Swain, or they decided they want to play a lot more League of Legends because they liked the new version of Swain. Or, they already play Swain a decent amount, but they decided it was going to be, the primary champion they'd play during the patch, something like that. And anything to make say like, well, you used to play a ton of Swain, you still do what you used to do, but you're playing more of it now. So again, yes, a larger portion of the games have come from low mastery Swain players, but right, both audiences in fact came in. Okay, Swain Mid is one example. Let's talk about Swain Support. Swain Support actually had a much lower, what I'm going to call like tourist increase. Oh, and by the way, this is simple pick rate. 14.22 compared to 14.18, I think, is a 3.6x the play rate. So, I mean, Swain got massively more popular. He is technically as equally balanced in very full air quotes, and that the high mastery Swain run rate is unchanged in 0.22 to 0.18. Actually, I might have created a 0.19, I don't remember, because 0.19 was a seasonal update. I'm pretty sure I compared to 0.19. But regardless, the major point here is that he is 3.6 times as popular as before with the same win rate, which is pretty sweet. Now, Swain Support did not have nearly as strong of what I'm going to call a tourism effect. It's still there, of course. This is, again, 14.21 to 14.18. And we saw a 30% increase in games patch over patch for very high mastery Swain players, and only a 64% increase in Swain games patch over patch from low mastery Swain players. Now, you're going to notice that the share of high mastery Swains in support is a little bit lower than in mid. But, we're seeing relatively similar ratios here, the 25 to 38 or so. And again, this is like fairly normal for a lot of champions to have numbers kind of around here where, like, yeah, about a third of all games on almost any given champion are players who are sub 50% win rate because they're not good at the champion yet. This is a very, very common trend. This is very, very likely. Anyway, again, didn't do the partial accounting of 0.22 here, but at the end of the day is, yeah, there was a small surge of low mastery Swain players, but still a pretty, solid holding average of a decent amount of high mastery Swain players. Okay, cool. So this is what we tend to see, at least in this one case study, of, hey, here's an update that looked exciting, players came over and tried it, and they came from like former mains or increasing the activity of mains, as well as from new players. So now let's compare this to what happens when a champ shows up at Worlds. Here is Galio. Even before the stuff, Galio had a very, 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 very low share of champion mains. Galio, only 8% of Galio plays in mid lane were done by high mastery Galio players. In fact, even at 14 plus, it still only makes up 40% of the games. And in fact, we compare 14.21 to 14.19, where we'd seen a large increase in low mastery player base numbers. We in fact saw 0 increase in high mastery player base numbers. Now, I want to make a very salient point here. I did not go back and do a more updated partial patch 14.22 sample. So this is a little bit out of date, but the fact is we had been seeing a steady pick rate increase to Galio during Worlds, right? 3.4%, 4.35%, 5.7%, 8.3%, patch over patch over patch. Galio's getting more and more and more and more popular, and comparing this number to this number, where we had a pretty meaningful 68% increase in Galio games, it did not. This 68% increase in Galio games over the, comparing 21 to 19, this large increase in Galio games during Worlds came entirely from low mastery players, right? Galio mains in basically no part were like, oh man, oh right, Galio's good actually. It's like they already knew. It's people who didn't know Galio was good started playing Galio because he was at Worlds. And again, I don't have this 0.22 data here to make the direct comparison. I have it with a very poor I have the ratio, which is fine. The ratio is not going to really change much over the course of days. But in terms of like actually number of games where they came from, I mean, we just know via the fact that the ratio got worse that like obviously it's still mostly flooding in from low mastery players, and the drop here, right? The severity of the drop here is clearly not even as close as this one, where it went from 27 to 15. Now it's went from 8 to 3, right? Less than half the share taken away, more than half the share taken away, right? So this is what I was talking about earlier, right? When you get a surge from some kind of influence, right? Some outside influence, some meta game influence, you tend to have novices show up, and when you have change because the champion got intrinsically changed in some way, you get mains coming back. Okay, so now those are like the primary ones. We're going to talk about a couple of controls here, some kind of lower scope things. So up first, we had a very small nerf to Aatrox. The win rate impact was relatively negligible. His player went down a little bit, right? He was 7.5, went to 6.9. Cool. It had even got up compared to 0.20. So he was like, relatively holding steady. And then, yeah, he lost like some of his play rate, about 1/10 of his play rate. And by the way, that 1/10 of his play rate came from everywhere. It came from everywhere, right? Like none of these numbers are functionally any different. I guess we can add a decimal here and be like, yeah, I mean, you could argue it slightly came away from low experience Aatrox players, but like, this champ lost 10% of his players patch over patch because he got nerfed. So people moved on to like play Ambessa or something, right? Like there's other explanations for why his his pick rate went down. So not only did Aatrox get nerfed, but Ambessa came out. And the result was no discernible change in who's playing Aatrox. So worth noting that a nerf of this magnitude, though again, players moved off to go play MS. And actually worth noting, by the way, MS's pick rate is about 10%. So 10% of Aatrox players leaving is almost entirely explained by MS's pick rate. Of note there. But hey, no discernible change in the makeup of Aatrox players. In fact, one thing worth noting is that Aatrox's win rate actually got inflated this patch because he's playing against Ambessa. Now, to be fair, Aatrox's Ambessa matchup isn't very good, but Ambessa's day one win rate was 40%. So, longer term, it'll actually get hurt by Ambessa existing and being a popular matchup that is good into Aatrox by around like 1.5-2% win rate, but still, no shift in play race numbers. Okay, that's a nerf. Okay, cool. What about some buffs? Okay, well, here's Fizz Mid. So again, I took two control patches, right? 14.20 no changes, 14.21 no changes, and then 14.22 we buffed Fizz. And so this, instead of doing game over game, obviously you can see the chart here, but this is what percentage of players are in each bracket, right? And so, hey, we had a 1.8% decrease patch over patch in very, very high mastery Fizz players, and a very small, like 0.7 or so increase in mastery 5, and a 1.5% increase here or whatever in this bracket. And it's like, yeah, there is a change, right? It does exist. It's around. This is here, sure, but the end result is like, oh yeah, we buffed this champion. We buffed it by 27% pick rate. Right. I think Fizz gained like 1 and change percent win rate or so. We have the pick rate. The pick increased by a full quarter, and it, well, as you can see here, a quarter of 25% of all the games would be like a 6% increase or so, right? And that's not what happened. It came fairly stably from everything. Now, again, I would have to wait until 0.22 is done and then pull the data and come at it again and say, hey, did we get patch over patch more games from, let's compare it a bit more fairly. At the end of the day, the point of this is still to be relatively low scope, relatively quick, like, hey, what happened here? And it's, a relatively flat change. Okay, so you'll notice, by the way, real quick, right? We're looking at Swain Mid, and we're seeing, 30 to 15%. We're seeing Swain Support, we're seeing 15 to 20%. We're seeing Galio Mid, and it's under 10%. We're seeing Aatrox, and it's around 15, 16%. We're seeing Fizz, it's around 25%. You ready for Katarina? Here's Katarina. So Katarina is the, by percentage, I think, most mained champion in League of Legends. 40% of all Katarina plays for the last 3 patches have been from extremely high mastery Katarina players. And in fact, they dwarf Katarina newbies by a very, very large degree. Now, there's 2 things I'm going to bring up here. Again, we should generally balance the game around roughly these brackets, probably more like this bracket, just in general. So you should actually compare apples to apples here. But another note worth mentioning is that the Katarina 1+ bracket is much weaker than most champions 1+. Like Galio is much easier to play, and Swain is much easier to play than Katarina. So even though Katarina has more mains, the damage of, even though there are fewer of them, the damage of low mastery Katarina players is actually greater per capita. Maybe not in sum total, because again, the actual share for Galio is, it's like half of all of his games. But the win rate loss per game here is very large for Katarina. So you still can't really compare win rates to win rates. Like, even though, yes, players are, Katarina is played by mains way more than Galio players are, there's still unfair comparisons here, right? But either way, we buffed Katarina by a meaningful amount, and we buffed her by, again, 30% pick rate. There were 30% more Katarina games. She was picked in 30% more games in 0.22 than in 0.21, the immediately preceding patch, right? Her pick rate went to 6.81%. It was 5.26%. Now, Fizz actually got some tourists, like a little bit, right? There was a small tourist impact. For Aatrox, we can see there's basically no tourist impact. Everyone left at like the same amount to go play on Bessa. For Katarina, there was actually no change. I mean, functionally, like, I'm sure this is not exactly just, statistical noise variance. Like, it probably happened a little bit here. A couple people decided, like, you know what, let's start learning Katarina, cool. But, like, we buffed Katarina by the same amount of pick rate gain as Fizz, and it came equally from every Katarina player, whether they're novices or experts. Cool, right? Interesting. That's all I've got, really. I'll go through two more data tables real quick. 14.20, 14.22. What this is trying to, once again, explain to players that pick rate does not imply mastery rate. So 14.20, none of these champions have had direct changes in this patch. They're just whatever state they were a month and a half ago. Swain Support had a 3.5% pick rate, and 90% of all Swain Support games were Swain Support mains, or at least Swain mains. Galio had a 4.4% pick rate, of course in mid lane in this case, slightly higher than Swain Support, and 1/3 the influence of mains, 1/3 the number of mains. Okay, well, here's Aatrox, a hugely popular champion, the most popular in the entire group here, and actually it's a relatively high mastery rate. Like, this is a very normal mastery rate, by the way. For 22 plus, a 60%, this is relatively normal. Here's slightly less popular Fizz. His actually popularity is above Swain Support. The pick rate is higher. What's the mastery? Oh, it's also higher. Oh, here's Katarina, even more popular than Fizz, second most popular. 40% highest in the game. Right? These are not correlating in any meaningful degree. They're not. They're just simply not correlating in a meaningful degree. That's just simply, obviously, not true. All right, well, we gave champions some buffs. Katarina explicitly gained, like, about 1.3% win rate. Zero change at all. Zero change whatsoever in share of mains. Fizz gained around about 1.3% win rate as well. Close to zero change. Slightly shifted towards Tourist because Fizz is easy enough to play that people think they can go and just start playing Fizz, and they're right. He's easier than Katarina. Still incredibly highly main champion. Aatrox, literally no change. Gets a small nerf. Other top laner goes away. Nothing happens. When, mains go nowhere. Okay, Galio, this one is, 14.22. Worlds happens. His pick rate jumps by double. Yeah. Pick rate jumps by double. It's all non-mains. It's all non-mains, right? Hey, 8% pick rate. Yeah, 3% mains. 4% pick rate. Still very few mains, right? Like, both of these numbers are still very, very few Galio mains. Galio just does not have a lot of mains. Hey, Swain Support after the changes. Still 40% mastery. Still quite high. Right? This is still a very good number. Swain Support still has a pretty reasonably buoyed number of mains. So, again, please stop thinking that pick rate affects mastery rate. It's not really true. Yes, surges in popularity can affect this. And if it's a surge because of an influencer, people who don't know the champion, try the champion out. If it's a surge because the champion actually got better, I mean, if it's a big enough deal, you'll be like, you know what? I hated Swain 3 years ago. I'll try him now. But if it's just like, here's a simple buff, it's really close to equal. This might be different for other cases at other points in time. Not sure. But from this case study, those are my conclusions so far. There's, of course, more to look at here, yes, but have fun. See you next time. Bye-bye.